We pulled into the Bellingham cruise terminal just before dusk. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel. My back ached from loading the Honda that morning. My shoulders felt like someone had hung weights from them. Aubrey opened her door. The cold air came in fast. "We made it," she said. I nodded. We had made it. Tacoma to Bellingham in one piece. The car V packed so tight I could barely see out the back window. 10 years old and still running. That counted for something. I had taken the seasonal work in Ketchikan because we needed the money. Aubrey had agreed to the move because the ferry let us keep the car and sleep in the public solarium instead of paying for a cabin. 38 hours to Alaska. I tried not to think about it. We grabbed our backpacks and sleeping bags from the back seat and walked toward the terminal building. The waiting room inside was dim and nearly empty. Maybe 20 people scattered across rows of plastic chairs. I counted them without meaning to. The check-in counter stood at the far end. A woman in a fleece vest and an Alaska Marine Highway badge looked up as we approached. Her name tag read Madeline. "Tickets?" she asked. I handed them over. She scanned the first one. The printer beside her whirred and spat out a boarding pass. She glanced at it, frowned, and scanned the second ticket. The printer made the same sound. She picked up both passes and held them under the desk lamp. Her frown deepened. "What's wrong?" Aubrey asked. "The ink," Madeline said. She turned one of the passes toward us. The bottom edge was smeared. The text blurred into gray streaks. "I will print new ones." She tore both passes in half and dropped them in the trash. The printer whirred again. This time the passes came out clean. "The system has been strange all day," Madeline said. She handed us the new passes. It even showed 342 passengers for this sailing, and we do not have anywhere near that many people. I looked at the waiting room again. 20 people, maybe 25 if I had missed a few in the restrooms. 342, I said. "I know." Madeline laughed once, a short, dry sound. I restarted the terminal twice. It still says the same thing. Aubrey took her pass and tucked it into her coat pocket. I held mine and stared at the number Madeline had mentioned. It sat wrong in my head. "You are cleared to board," Madeline said. "Drive down to the loading area and follow the crew directions." "Thanks," I said. We turned to leave. I glanced back at the counter and saw an old black leather suitcase sitting beside the lost and found bin. The leather was cracked and brittle. A faded tag hung from the handle. I stepped closer and read it. Canadian Pacific Railway, SS Princess Sophia. I opened my mouth to ask about it. Madeline reached over and pulled the suitcase behind the desk before I could say anything. "Have a good crossing," she said. We walked back to the Honda without speaking. I started the engine and drove toward the loading ramp. A man in a blue Alaska Marine Highway jacket stood at the base of the ramp, waving us forward. His badge read Everett Richardson. He guided us onto the car deck with quick hand signals. The metal floor was dry and cold under the tires. I parked where he pointed, between a camper and a pickup truck. Everett walked over as I shut off the engine. He leaned down to my window. "Take anything you need now," he said. "Passengers are not allowed back down after departure unless they are escorted." "Understood," I said. He nodded and moved on to the next vehicle. I popped the trunk and grabbed our sleeping bags. Aubrey pulled her backpack from the back seat. I locked the doors and checked them twice. As I turned toward the stairwell, I saw wet footprints on the deck. They crossed from the stern ramp toward the interior stairs. The prints were clear and dark against the dry metal. I looked around. No one nearby had wet shoes. No one was dripping water. "You smell that?" Aubrey asked. I breathed in. Cold seawater, faint but unmistakable. "We are inside," I said. "The car deck is enclosed." "I know." I stared at the footprints. They ended at the base of the stairwell and did not continue up. "Come on," Aubrey said. "Let's get a spot before they are all taken." We climbed 3 levels to the heated solarium. The room was bright and warm, with rows of reclining lounge chairs facing tall windows. Other passengers had already claimed chairs near the front. Backpacks and duffel bags marked territory. A young man in a university hoodie looked up as we entered. He had dark brown hair and a friendly face. "Here," he said. He picked up his duffel bag from the chair beside him. "You guys take these 2. I can move. You sure?" I asked. "Yeah, man. Plenty of room." "Thanks," Aubrey said. We dropped our bags and claimed the chairs. The young man sat down across from us and held out his hand. "Dylan," he said. "Dylan Dennis." I shook his hand. "Troy." "This is Aubrey. Heading to Ketchikan?" "Yeah, you?" "Wrangle. Fisheries job." An older woman 2 chairs over smiled at us. She had short silver gray hair and a quilted travel coat. "Still better than an airport, is not it?" she said. Aubrey laughed. "I hope so." "I am Diane," the woman said. "Diane Lee. Nice to meet you," I said. I sat down and adjusted the chair. Through the windows, I could see the terminal building and the dark water beyond. The sky was fading from blue to purple. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. We would leave Bellingham at 6. 38 hours to Ketchikan. I tried to picture the route. Up through the inside passage, past islands and inlets I had never seen. I thought about the blurred boarding passes. The passenger count Madeline had mentioned, 342. I thought about the suitcase with the Princess Sophia tag. I thought about the wet footprints on the dry car deck. Aubrey leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Dylan pulled out his phone and scrolled through something. Diane opened a paperback and settled in to read. The ferry engines rumbled to life somewhere below us. I felt the vibration through the chair. We were leaving Bellingham. The ferry had left Bellingham on time at 6 o'clock. I watched the terminal lights slide away through the solarium windows as the engines pushed us north into the channel. The sun had already set, and the water looked black between the San Juan Islands and Vancouver Island. Aubrey sat beside me in a lounge chair with her backpack wedged under her knees and her coat pulled up to her chin. She closed her eyes around 7:30 and fell asleep before we cleared the islands. I stayed awake. I couldn't stop thinking about the things I'd seen at the terminal. The blurred passenger count Madeline had mentioned. The old suitcase with the Princess Sophia tag. The wet footprints crossing the dry car deck. None of it added up, but none of it was dangerous either. Just strange. I told myself that was all it was. The solarium stayed warm. A few other passengers dozed in their chairs or read on their phones. Dylan Dennis sat 2 rows ahead of us with his duffel bag under his seat and his hood pulled up. Diane Lee sat near the forward windows with a paperback open on her lap, though I never saw her turn a page. The ferry rocked gently as it moved through the dark water. The hum of the engines made it easy to lose track of time. I shifted in my chair around 10:45. My lower back ached from sitting too long, and I leaned forward to adjust the cushion. That's when I felt it. Something flat and stiff under the fabric. I reached down and pulled it out. It was a laminated sheet, plain white paper sealed in cheap plastic, the kind you'd run through a home laminator. The edges were uneven, and the seal had bubbles in it. At the top, in bold black letters, it said, "Read before midnight on October 24." I turned it over. The back was blank. I turned it again and read the first line. Rule 1. No Alaska Marine Highway employee will hand out wool blankets after 11 o'clock p.m. Any blanket stamped SS Princess Sophia must be thrown overboard immediately. My stomach tightened. I read it again to make sure I hadn't misread the name. SS Princess Sophia, the same name that had been on the suitcase tag at the terminal. I kept reading. Rule 2. Do not answer anyone who asks for the current time. The only acceptable response is, "The wireless is down." Rule 3. If the ferry windows show mountains close enough to touch, or a reef breaking water under the bow, cover the glass and stop looking outside. I looked up at the solarium windows. They showed nothing but black water and distant shore lights. No mountains, no reefs. I looked back down. Rule 4. Do not go below deck 5 after 3 longhorn blasts. The car deck will contain vehicles that never boarded in Bellingham. Rule 5. Do not enter any doorway marked C19, Purser, or Canadian Pacific Railway, no matter where it appears. Rule 6. Real crew members wear Alaska Marine Highway badges. Anyone wearing a cork life belt belongs to another ship. I stopped breathing for a second. A cork life belt, the kind they used on old ships before modern life jackets. I forced myself to keep reading. Rule 7. If the public address system announces Vanderbilt Reef, stay inside and refuse all lifeboat instructions. Rule 8. If you see your own car with water inside it, do not open any door, even if someone you love is trapped behind the glass. Rule 9. At dawn, present your original boarding passes to a real Alaska Marine Highway employee. If the ink has run completely, your names have moved to the wrong manifest. I sat there holding the sheet. My hands were shaking. I read it through twice more, trying to make sense of it. It had to be a joke, some kind of fairy tradition to scare tourists. But the details were too specific. The Princess Sophia, Vanderbilt Reef, the wrong manifest. I reached over and shook Aubrey's shoulder. She opened her eyes and blinked at me. "What?" she said. "Look at this." I handed her the sheet. She sat up and held it under the overhead light. I watched her eyes move down the page. Her expression didn't change until she reached Rule 8. Then her mouth tightened. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "Under my chair cushion. It was just there." She turned the sheet over, checked the back, then read the front again. "It's probably just some fairy joke," she said. "People do this kind of thing all the time. It has the Princess Sophia on it. That was the name on the suitcase tag at the terminal. So someone knows their Alaska history and wanted to freak people out. It's working." I wanted to believe her. I tried to. But my chest felt tight, and I couldn't stop looking at the rules. Diane Lee's voice came from 2 rows over. I found one too. I turned. Diane was holding up an identical laminated sheet. Her face was pale. "Under my chair," she said. I thought it was a safety card at first. Dylan looked up from his phone. He leaned over and checked under his own seat cushion. He pulled out another sheet and held it up to the light. "Yeah, I got one too," he said. He read the first few lines and laughed. "This is hilarious. Someone's really committed to the bit." Aubrey looked at me. I looked at Diane. Diane looked at Dylan. "It's not funny," Diane said quietly. Dylan shrugged. "Fairies always attract weird people. I bet someone printed 100 of these and stuck them everywhere. Probably gets a kick out of watching tourists panic." "It says to read it before midnight," I said. "Yeah, I can read," Dylan said. "It also says my car's going to fill up with water and I'll see myself drowning." "You really think that's going to happen?" I didn't answer. I looked back at my sheet. The laminate was cheap, but the printing was clear. Someone had taken the time to make this, to hide it under the chairs, to write 9 very specific rules about things that shouldn't exist on a modern ferry. Aubrey folded her sheet in half and tucked it into her coat pocket. She didn't throw it away. "Let's just keep an eye out," she said. "If anything weird happens, we'll find a crew member." "Nothing weird is going to happen," Dylan said. He dropped his sheet on the floor beside his chair. "It's a ferry. We're going to sleep in uncomfortable chairs for 2 nights, eat overpriced food, and get off in Ketchikan. That's it." Diane picked up her sheet and held it against her chest. She didn't say anything else. I held my sheet in both hands. Aubrey looked at her chair as if more copies might be hidden there. Diane did the same. Dylan glanced down at his seat, then back at his phone. I didn't throw my sheet away either. Dylan folded his copy of the sheet in half and stuffed it into the pocket of his hoodie. "All right, so someone's really committed to the bit," he said. "I'll give them that." Aubrey pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and looked at me. "Should we tell someone?" "Tell them what?" Dylan said. "That someone left scary photocopies under our chairs?" Diane set her sheet down on the small table beside her lounge chair and adjusted her scarf. "I've been on this route 4 times, she said. "Never seen anything like this." "First time for everything," Dylan said. I looked down at the sheet again. The laminate felt cheap, the kind you could buy at an office supply store, but the text itself was too specific, too detailed. I thought about Rule 1 and checked my watch. 11:07. "We should stay awake," I said. Aubrey frowned. "Troy, it's a prank." "Maybe." "Definitely," Dylan said. He stretched his arms over his head and yawned. "But hey, I'm not sleeping anyway. Too wired from driving all day." Diane smiled. "I brought a book," she said. "I'll be up for a while." Aubrey sighed and pulled her phone from her pocket. She tapped the screen a few times and held it up so I could see the battery percentage. 62%, she said. "If we're staying up, I'm watching something." I nodded and sat back in my chair. Around us, the solarium was quiet. Most of the other passengers had already fallen asleep or gone to find other spaces on the ferry. The overhead lights hummed softly. Outside the windows, the black water of the channel slid past in darkness. At 11:13, a man walked into the solarium carrying folded gray blankets. He wore a dark overcoat that looked heavy and old-fashioned, the kind with a wide collar and brass buttons down the front. His pants were wool, creased sharply, and his shoes were leather with thick soles. A cork life belt hung from one shoulder by canvas straps. The belt was stained and worn, the canvas frayed at the edges. He walked slowly between the rows of lounge chairs, holding the blankets in both arms. His face was pale and expressionless. He did not look at anyone directly. Aubrey sat up straighter and pulled one earbud out. "Oh, thank God," she said. "I'm freezing." She started to reach toward him. I grabbed her wrist. "Don't," I said. She looked at me, confused. "Troy, it's just a blanket." "No," I said. "Don't take it." The man stopped beside Diane's chair and held out a folded blanket without speaking. Diane looked at it, then at me, then back at the man. "No thank you," she said quietly. The man moved on without acknowledging her refusal. He stopped beside Dylan's chair next and extended the blanket toward him. Dylan glanced at me. "Dude, it's fine," he said. "It's cold in here. Don't take it," I said. Dylan laughed, but it sounded forced. "Come on, man, you're really doing this?" The man stood perfectly still, holding the blanket. His eyes were fixed somewhere past Dylan's shoulder. Dylan took the blanket. He unfolded it halfway and turned it over in his hands. The wool was coarse and gray, and it smelled faintly of salt and mildew. Dylan ran his thumb over something near the corner and stopped. "What is that?" he said. I leaned closer. A faint stamp had been pressed into the fabric in dark ink. The letters were blurred, but still legible. SS Princess Sophia. Dylan's face went pale. He looked up at the man in the overcoat, but the man had already turned and was walking back toward the exit. The cork life belt swayed with each step. "Hey," Dylan called. "Hey, wait." The man did not stop. He pushed through the door and disappeared into the corridor beyond. Dylan stood up, holding the blanket at arm's length like it might burn him. "Okay," he said. "Okay, that's not funny." Aubrey pulled her other earbud out and stared at the blanket. "Is that real?" she said. "It's a prank," Dylan said. "It has to be." I pointed at the stamp. "That's what Rule 1 said," I told him. "SS Princess Sophia. You have to throw it overboard." Dylan looked at me, then at the blanket, then at the solarium windows. The glass was black with night and reflected the overhead lights back at us in long streaks. "I'm not going outside," he said. "It's like 40 degrees out there." The rule said. "I don't care what the rule said," Dylan interrupted. "Someone printed that sheet to mess with people, and now someone handed out blankets with a fake stamp to keep the joke going. I'm not playing along." He walked over to the trash can near the vending machines and dropped the blanket inside. It landed with a soft thump. "There," he said. "Gone." Diane shook her head slowly. "The rule said overboard," she said. "Yeah, well, the rule can kiss my ass," Dylan said. He sat back down in his chair and pulled his phone out. His hands were shaking. Aubrey looked at me. "Troy?" she said. "I don't know," I said, but I did know. The blanket was still on the ferry. Rule 1 had been specific. Overboard. Not in the trash. Not hidden. Overboard. Dylan scrolled through his phone and did not look up. The solarium settled back into quiet. Diane picked up her book but did not open it. Aubrey put her earbuds back in, but I could tell she was not watching anything. I sat with the laminated sheet on my lap and watched the clock on the wall. 11:20, 11:35, 11:52. At 12:17, the man in the overcoat came back. He walked directly to Dylan's chair and stopped. Dylan looked up from his phone, startled. "Jesus," Dylan said. "What?" The man in the overcoat looked down at him. His face was still pale and expressionless, but his eyes were sharper now, focused. "What time is it?" the man said. His voice was calm and quiet, like he was asking about the weather. Dylan blinked. "What? What time is it?" the man repeated. Dylan glanced at me, then at his phone screen. "It's 12:17, he said. The man smiled. It was a small, polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "Thank you," he said. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a brass key. He pressed it into Dylan's palm and closed Dylan's fingers around it. "Your berth is ready," the man said. Then he turned and walked back toward the exit. Dylan opened his hand and stared at the key. It was old and tarnished, with a round head and a long shaft. A tag dangled from it on a thin chain. The tag had a number stamped into the brass, C19. Dylan's face went white. "No," he said. "No, this is bullshit." He stood up and looked around the solarium like he was searching for someone to explain what was happening. Aubrey pulled her earbuds out again. Diane set her book down. "Throw it away," I said. "Right now." Dylan looked at the key in his hand. "This isn't real," he said. "This is someone screwing with me." "Dylan," I said, "throw it away." He shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm going to find that steward, Everett. I'm going to report this." "Don't," I said. "Stay here." "Why?" Dylan said. His voice was rising now. "So I can wait for the next creepy guy to show up and hand me something else? No, I'm done." He shoved the key into his pocket and walked toward the exit. "Dylan," Aubrey called. He did not stop. The door swung shut behind him. Diane stood up slowly. "Should we go after him?" she said. I did not answer. I was staring at the clock on the wall. 12:18. The ferry's horn sounded. It was not the short blast I had heard earlier when we passed another vessel. This was long and deep and sustained. 3 blasts, each one lasting several seconds. The sound rattled the solarium window. Aubrey pulled out her phone and opened the map. I leaned close and watched the blue dot that marked our position. It sat exactly where it should have been, drifting north through the channel between Vancouver Island and the mainland. The route looked normal. The estimated arrival time in Ketchikan had not changed. I looked up at the covered windows. The tarp bulged slightly against the clips, as if something pressed against the glass from outside. "The phone says we're still off Canada," Aubrey said. "But those mountains, I know." Diane stood near the trash can where Dylan had thrown the blanket. Her hands were clasped in front of her chest. "Should we tell someone?" she asked. "Tell them what?" Aubrey said. "That the windows are lying?" I walked to an empty lounge chair near the aft bulkhead and yanked the blue tarp off its frame. The metal clips clattered to the deck. I carried the tarp to the nearest window and started fastening it over the glass. Aubrey grabbed towels from her backpack and moved to the next window. Diane picked up a fleece blanket someone had left on a chair and helped cover the third pane. We worked without speaking. The static from the public address system grew louder as we clipped the last section of tarp into place. Then the old male voice returned. "The vessel has grounded at Vanderbilt Reef. Passengers with berths should prepare for relief boats." The voice was calm. It sounded like an announcement from a captain who had done this before and expected to be obeyed. Aubrey froze with a towel in her hands. "Vanderbilt Reef," I said. "That's in Lynn Canal." "Where?" "Near Juneau, hundreds of miles north of here." Diane turned toward me. Her face had gone pale. "The Princess Sophia hit Vanderbilt Reef," I said, "in 1918. It was grounded for a day before it slid off and sank. Everyone died." Aubrey dropped the towel. The solarium door banged open. Everett Richardson stepped inside. His blue jacket was unzipped, and his shirt underneath was dark with sweat. He looked at each of us in turn, then at the covered windows. "Stay where you are," he said. "The bridge did not make that announcement." "Then who did?" Aubrey asked. "I don't know. I pulled the laminated sheet from my pocket and held it out. Everett walked over and took it. He read it without sitting down. His jaw tightened as he reached Rule 7. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "Under my chair." He did not laugh. He did not tell me it was a prank. I have seen sheets like this on 2 October sailings, he said. We were told to remove them because they scared passengers, not because they were false. Aubrey made a small sound in her throat. What does that mean? I asked. Everett handed the sheet back to me. There is no public doorway labeled C-19 on the MV Columbia, he said. If one appears, do not go through it. Dylan took the key, I said. He went to find you. Everett closed his eyes for a moment. Anyone who accepted a key, a blanket, or a time request has to be brought back before sunrise, he said. If we find him now, we might still have time. Then let's go, Aubrey said. Everett looked at Diane. Stay here, he said. Do not answer anyone who asks you a question. Do not accept anything from anyone you do not recognize. Do you understand? Diane nodded. I'll stay, she said. I promise. Everett turned toward the door, and I followed him. Aubrey was right behind me. We stepped into the passage, and Everett pulled the door shut. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, then steadied. He led us toward the central stairwell. Our footsteps echoed on the metal floor. As we descended, the sound of the ferry changed. The low hum of the engines faded. In its place came a deep groaning, as if the hull were bending under pressure. Wind howled somewhere below us, though we were inside an enclosed stairwell. I heard distant screaming. It was faint, but unmistakable. Voices calling for help in the dark. Aubrey grabbed my arm. I kept walking. We reached deck 5. Everett stopped at the bottom of the stairs and held up one hand. The passage in front of us was empty. Gray metal walls, overhead pipes, a maintenance closet on the left. Everything looked normal. Then I saw the corridor. It was narrow and wooden, wedged between 2 steel bulkheads where nothing should have fit. The walls were paneled in dark wood that gleamed under dim electric lights. A brass sign hung above the entrance. The letters were engraved in an old-fashioned serif font. Canadian Pacific Railway. Everett stepped in front of the entrance. Do not go in there, he said. Dylan screamed. The sound came from inside the corridor. It was raw and terrified, and it called my name. I stepped across the threshold. Aubrey followed. The corridor smelled like wet wood and storm wind. It stretched ahead of us, narrow and impossibly long, with walls that didn't belong inside a modern ferry. A brass sign hung above the entrance, Canadian Pacific Railway. Aubrey moved closer behind me. Her breathing was loud in the silence. Dylan screamed again. His voice came from deeper in the corridor, high and terrified. Don't go in there, Everett said. I was already walking. The floor was planks, not metal. They creaked under my weight. Troy, wait, Aubrey said. I didn't wait. Dylan screamed again, and I followed the sound. The corridor ended at a door. The brass plate read C-19. I grabbed the handle. It was cold and slick. Stop, Everett said behind me. I pushed the door open. The room was enormous. It stretched back farther than the ferry's hull could possibly contain. Dark wood paneling covered the walls. A brass porthole on the far side showed nothing but black water pressing against the glass. A bed sat against one wall, half submerged. Luggage floated beside it, soaked and bloated. Dylan stood in the center of the room. Water rose to his waist. His skin was gray. His lips were blue. He still held the brass key. A young man sat on the bed. He was dry. He wore Dylan's hoodie. A cork life belt lay across his knees. Dylan turned toward me. His eyes were wide. Help me, he said. His voice was thin. I can't move. I stepped forward. Everett grabbed my jacket and yanked me back. I stumbled into the corridor. The young man on the bed stood. He smiled. Water poured from his mouth. It ran down his chin and soaked the hoodie, but the fabric stayed dry. He walked toward us. Dylan screamed again, "Don't leave me." The young man stepped through the doorway. He walked through me. His body was cold and wet and not solid. I felt him pass through my chest like freezing water. He kept walking down the corridor without looking back. Behind him, Dylan sank. The water closed over his head. His hand broke the surface once, still holding the key, and then he was gone. The door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the corridor. Then the wood was gone. The brass plate was gone. The corridor was gone. I stood facing a flat steel wall. It was smooth and unmarked. There was no seam, no hinge, no sign a door had ever been there. Aubrey grabbed my arm. "Where did he go?" I didn't answer. Water ran across my shoes. It was cold and black and smelled like the ocean. It spread across the deck in a thin sheet, pooling against the base of the wall where C-19 had been. Everett leaned against the opposite bulkhead. His face was pale. His right hand was pressed against his chest, and blood seeped between his fingers. "He's gone," Everett said. "What do you mean gone?" Aubrey said. "Dylan was traded onto the Princess Sophia manifest," Everett said. "He accepted a berth and gave the current time." I stared at the wall. The water kept spreading. "We have to get him back," I said. "You can't," Everett said. "We have to try." "He's not on the ship anymore." I turned to face him. "What does that mean?" Everett didn't answer right away. He looked down at his bleeding hand, then back at the wall. "It means he's on the other manifest now," Everett said. "The one that sank in 1918. Aubrey made a sound in her throat. It wasn't quite a word. I looked back at the wall. The water was still there, pooling around my feet. I turned away from the flat steel wall where C-19 had been. Water from the vanished room still ran across my shoes, trailing toward the drain grates in the corridor floor. Everett stood against the opposite wall, breathing hard and cradling his right hand against his chest. Aubrey leaned against the bulkhead beside him, her eyes closed. "We need to move," Everett said. I nodded and started back toward the stairwell. My legs felt loose and unsteady. Dylan's scream still echoed in my head, even though the corridor was silent now except for the low hum of the ferry's engines. Aubrey pushed herself off the wall and followed. Everett came last, moving slowly. We climbed the stairs to deck 5. The overhead lights flickered once but held. My hands were shaking. I shoved them into my jacket pockets and kept climbing. Aubrey moved beside me without speaking. Her face was pale and her jaw was tight. When we reached the landing, I looked back at her and stopped. The gray wool blanket Dylan had thrown away was draped over her shoulders. "Aubrey," I said. She looked at me, then down at herself. Her mouth opened. She grabbed the blanket and jerked it off, holding it at arm's length like it was crawling with insects. "I didn't pick this up," she said. "I swear to you, I didn't pick this up." Everett stepped past me and took the blanket from her hands. He turned it over. The faded stamp across one corner read SS Princess Sophia. The letters had bled dark ink into the wool, and where the blanket had rested against Aubrey's coat, a wet stain had soaked through the fabric. "That blanket marked her as available for transfer," Everett said. "We have to get it off the ship before dawn." "How did it get on her?" I asked. "It doesn't matter," Everett said. "It's on her now." He folded the blanket under his good arm and started down the corridor toward the exterior door at the far end. I grabbed Aubrey's hand and pulled her after him. Her fingers were ice cold. The stain on her coat was spreading, the ink bleeding outward in thin black veins across the gray nylon. We ran. The corridor stretched longer than it should have, the walls pressing in on both sides. The overhead lights flickered again, and somewhere below us I heard the groan of metal under strain. Everett reached the exterior door first and shoved the handle down with his elbow. The door didn't open. He hit it again, harder, and the latch gave. The ferry lurched. I stumbled into Aubrey, and she caught herself against the wall. The deck tilted sharply to starboard, then righted itself with a shudder that rattled the light fixtures. Everett yanked the door open. Cold air poured through the gap, but it wasn't the clean salt wind of the inside passage. It was storm wind, raw and freezing, carrying sleet that stung my face and hands. Beyond the threshold, the deck was gone. In its place stretched a wide wooden promenade lit by dim electric bulbs and brass fixtures. The deck boards were slick with ice and seawater. Along the rails stood passengers, dozens of them, dressed in long coats and wool suits and wide-brimmed hats that belonged to another century. None of them moved. They stood facing outward toward the storm, silent and still, while waves broke over the rail and soaked their legs. Beyond them, mountains rose black against the gray sky, close enough to touch. A man stepped forward from the crowd. He wore a dark overcoat and a cork-life belt strapped across his chest. His hair was slicked back, and a trimmed mustache framed his mouth. His skin was gray-white, and his eyes were pale and washed out, like glass beads. He smiled. "Aubrey Holmes," he said, "your birth has been corrected." Aubrey went rigid beside me. Her hand slipped out of mine. The man held out a boarding card. It was cream-colored and dry, printed with ornate black letters that read Canadian Pacific Railway. Below that, in smaller type, SS Princess Sophia, berth C-19. "You may board now," the man said. Aubrey's eyes unfocused. She took a step toward the open door. I grabbed her arm and yanked her back. She stumbled into me, and I wrapped both arms around her and pulled. The wool blanket slipped from Everett's grip and fell across the threshold onto the wet promenade deck. The man with the mustache bent down and picked it up. He folded it carefully and draped it over one arm. "Thank you," he said. His face collapsed. The skin split down the center and peeled back, revealing swollen gray flesh underneath. His eyes sank into their sockets, and his mouth opened too wide, filled with black water that poured down his chin and soaked his collar. The mustache stayed in place, neatly trimmed, while the rest of his face caved inward under pressure that had crushed the bones beneath. The passengers along the rail turned toward us as one. Their faces were intact, but their eyes were empty. Water ran from their sleeves and the hems of their coats. They began to walk forward, moving slowly across the icy deck. Everett slammed the door. It didn't latch. Something jammed into the gap from the other side. Pale fingers curled around the edge of the door, pushing it open. Everett threw his weight against it, but the door kept moving. The fingers bent backward, but didn't break. More hands appeared, shoving through the gap, their skin bloated and gray. "Fire extinguisher," Everett said through clenched teeth. "Behind you." I let go of Aubrey and spun around. A red extinguisher hung on the wall 5 feet down the corridor. I ran to it, ripped it from its bracket, and ran back. Everett was losing ground. The door had opened 6 inches, and an arm had pushed through up to the elbow. The hand groped blindly toward Everett's face. I swung the extinguisher like a bat and hit the fingers. Bone cracked. The hand jerked back, but 2 more appeared in its place. I swung again, harder, and the extinguisher's metal base sheared through the pale flesh. The severed fingers fell onto the deck and lay twitching. Everett roared and threw himself against the door. It slammed shut. There was a wet crunch and he screamed. He pulled his hand back from the edge of the door and staggered away from it. Blood poured from his right hand. 2 of his fingers were gone, sheared off at the second knuckle. The stumps were white bone and red meat. The door held. Everett sank to his knees, still cradling his hand. Blood dripped onto the deck in thick red drops. He looked up at me, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Get Aubrey to the purser's desk on deck 6 at dawn," he said. "Both of you." With both modern boarding passes. I nodded. My chest was heaving, and my hands were still locked around the fire extinguisher. I set it down carefully and helped Everett to his feet. He swayed but stayed upright. Aubrey stood frozen against the wall, staring at the closed door. "Aubrey," I said. She didn't move. I grabbed her shoulders and turned her toward me. Her eyes were unfocused again, staring past me at something I couldn't see. "Aubrey," I said again. She blinked. Her eyes cleared. She looked at me, then at Everett, then at the blood on the deck. "We have to go," I said. She nodded. I reached into my jacket pocket for our boarding passes. My fingers closed around the folded cards, and I pulled them out. I held mine in my left hand and hers in my right, except it wasn't hers. The card in my right hand was damp and cream-colored, printed with ornate black letters, Canadian Pacific Railway, SS Princess Sophia. The ink had bled at the edges, and the paper smelled like salt water and rot. I checked my other pocket. Empty. I looked at Aubrey. She was staring at the card in my hand. The damp Princess Sophia card felt heavier than paper should. I turned it over in my hand, looking for any trace of Aubrey's name, but the ink had already bled into the fibers. The modern Alaska Marine Highway logo was gone. In its place sat a faded Canadian Pacific Railway stamp and a berth assignment that read C-19. I looked at Aubrey. She was staring at the card too, her face colorless. "He took it," I said. "The one in Dylan's hoodie. He took yours when he walked through me." Aubrey's hands were shaking. "We have to get it back." "I know." Everett was still leaning against the bulkhead, cradling his ruined hand against his chest. Blood had soaked through the cloth he'd wrapped around it. He looked at the Princess Sophia card and closed his eyes. "You need the original pass by dawn," he said. "If the ink runs completely before you find it, she'll be on their manifest instead of ours." "Where did he go?" I asked. "I don't know. But if he's still aboard, he'll be somewhere passengers gather, somewhere he can watch." Aubrey grabbed my arm. "The solarium." We left Diane alone. We moved back toward the stairs. The ferry felt wrong now. The walls were too narrow, the air too cold, and the lights flickered in rhythms that didn't match the engine vibration. I could hear water dripping somewhere behind the panels, though the deck was dry. When we reached the solarium, Diane was standing beside the covered windows with her back rigid and her hands pressed flat against her sides. She didn't turn when we entered. "Diane?" Aubrey said softly. Diane's voice came out in a whisper. "A girl outside the tarp is using my daughter's voice. She keeps asking to be let in from the cold." I moved closer, but didn't touch her. "Don't answer her. I know, I read the rules. But it sounds exactly like her." Diane's shoulders trembled. "She's saying my name." The tarp over the solarium glass bulged inward. Not from wind, the pressure was localized, as if dozens of hands were pressing from the other side of the window. The plastic sheeting strained against the clips, and I could see the outlines of fingers spreading across the surface. "Diane, step back," I said. She took 2 steps toward us, her eyes still locked on the covered glass. The bulging stopped. The tarp settled flat again. Aubrey was scanning the solarium. Most of the lounge chairs were empty now. A few passengers slept in far corners, oblivious or pretending to be. The trash can where Dylan had thrown the blanket sat near the aft exit. "There," Aubrey said. The dry young man stood beside the trash can. He was still wearing Dylan's hoodie, still dry despite the seawater that had filled C-19. His face was expressionless. A boarding pass was tucked into the front pocket of the hoodie, and even from across the room, I could see the blue Alaska Marine Highway logo. I started toward him. He didn't move until I was 3 steps away. Then he turned and bolted for the aft stairs. I ran. My boots hit the deck hard, and I heard Aubrey and Diane behind me. The young man moved fast, too fast for someone who should have been waterlogged and dead. He reached the stairwell and descended without touching the handrail. The aft stairs led down through decks 6, 5, and 4 to the car deck. Rule 4 said not to go below deck 5 after 3 long horn blasts. The horn had sounded over an hour ago, but the boarding pass was disappearing into the stairwell, and Aubrey's name was already fading. I stopped at the deck 5 landing and looked back. Aubrey was 2 steps behind me, her face pale but determined. Diane was right behind her. "Troy, what's wrong?" Aubrey asked. I opened my mouth to answer, then realized I'd been about to say her name and couldn't remember it. The syllables were there a second ago. Now, they were gone. I looked directly at her. The name came back. Aubrey. Aubrey Holmes. My wife. I looked away to check the stairwell below. The name vanished again like smoke. I pulled the Princess Sophia card from my pocket. The ink had spread further. Her first name was still legible, but her surname was bleeding into the paper grain. In another hour it would be gone completely. "We have to go down," I said. "Now." "The rule," Diane started. "I know. But if we don't get that pass back, she's not getting off this ferry." Aubrey looked at me. I forced myself to hold her gaze and keep her name solid in my mind. "Aubrey. Aubrey. Then we go," she said. I descended below deck 5. The air changed immediately. It was colder, wetter, and it carried the smell of old seawater and rust. The lights in the stairwell flickered once, then stayed dim. I could hear the young man's footsteps echoing below, moving toward the car deck. I kept my eyes on Aubrey as much as I could. Every time I looked away to check the stairs, her name slipped out of my thoughts. I'd remember I was chasing someone. I'd remember the boarding pass. But the person behind me became just a woman I needed to protect, and I couldn't remember why. Then I'd look back, and it would all return. Aubrey, my wife, the person I'd driven 30 hours to Bellingham with, the person who'd agreed to move to Alaska because I'd lost my job and we were out of options. The stairwell ended at the car deck entrance. The door was propped open. Beyond it, I could see rows of vehicles parked in the dim overhead lighting. The young man stood just inside, waiting. I stepped through the doorway. Aubrey and Diane followed. The moment we crossed the threshold, I knew we'd made a mistake. The car deck was no longer filled only with modern vehicles. The stairwell spat me out onto the car deck, and the air hit me wrong. Too cold, too wet, salt and rust, and something older underneath. The deck wasn't right. My Honda sat 3 rows back where I'd parked it, but the vehicles around it had multiplied. A Ford pickup I recognized from the loading line, a white camper with Washington plates. Then, wedged between them, a black touring car with brass headlamps and wooden spoke wheels. Water pooled beneath its running boards. Beyond it stood a luggage cart with iron wheels, the kind porters pushed by hand. A horse-drawn baggage wagon leaned against the starboard bulkhead, its traces empty and dripping. None of those things had driven onto this ferry. Footsteps pounded behind me. Aubrey and Diane reached the bottom of the stairs as I started toward the Honda. Troy, wait. I didn't wait. The dry young man was already moving between vehicles ahead of me, Dylan's hoodie soaked through now and clinging to his shoulders. He glanced back once. His face was still Dylan's face, but the eyes were flat and gray. My Honda's windows were fogged, not condensation, not breath. The glass was white and opaque, like someone had been trapped inside with the heat off for hours. I stopped 3 feet from the passenger door. Movement behind the fog. A palm pressed against the glass. Fingers splayed. Then another hand, and the fog cleared in streaks where the skin touched. Aubrey sat in the passenger seat. Her hair was plastered to her skull. Her mouth hung open. Her eyes were white, and her fingernails were cracked down to the quick. She pounded on the window without sound, her broken nails leaving red smears on the glass. In the driver's seat I saw myself, my own face, my jacket, my hands on the wheel, but my mouth was open too wide, and my eyes stared forward at nothing, and water ran from my nose and ears. Don't open it. Aubrey's voice came from behind me. The real Aubrey. I turned and saw her standing beside Diane, both of them staring at the Honda. Rule 8, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. The thing in the passenger seat pressed its face against the glass. Its lips moved. It said my name, but I couldn't hear it. I could only see the shape of the word. Troy, he's under the car. Diane pointed. The dry young man had dropped to his stomach and was sliding beneath the Honda's undercarriage. Dylan's hoodie dragging through the oily water that had started pooling across the deck. I hit the ground. My palms slapped metal and salt water, and I grabbed his ankle before he could pull himself all the way under. His skin felt wrong, loose. I yanked backward, and the skin tore like wet tissue paper, peeling away in my grip to expose gray, swollen flesh underneath. He twisted and kicked. His other foot caught my jaw, and my vision went white for half a second. Then, Diane was there with a metal wheel chalk in both hands. She swung it down hard and hit his shoulder. Something cracked. Not bone. Something wetter. Aubrey lunged past me, reached under the Honda, and came up with her boarding pass clutched in her fist. The paper was damp, but intact. The ink hadn't run. The dry young man rolled onto his back and opened his mouth. Water poured out. Black water. Seawater. It didn't stop. Inside the Honda, the drowned versions of us started slamming their heads against the windows. Once. Twice. The glass cracked in spiderweb patterns. Sunrise is minutes away. Everett's voice came from above. I looked up and saw him at the top of the stairwell, gripping the railing with his left hand. His right hand hung at his side, wrapped in a shirt that was already soaked through with blood. 2 fingers were gone. "Move," he shouted. I got to my feet. Aubrey was already running. Diane grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the stairs. Behind us, the dry young man sat up. Water still poured from his mouth, from his nose, from his ears. He reached toward us with hands that were too long now, fingers stretching like taffy. The Honda's passenger window shattered. The drowned Aubrey reached through the broken glass, her arm extending farther than an arm should extend, her broken nails scraping the deck. I ran. Diane was ahead of me. Aubrey was at the stairs. My boots hit water with every step. The deck was flooding, not from a breach, not from a leak. The water was just there, rising from nowhere, black and cold and spreading in all directions. I reached the stairs, grabbed the railing, looked back. The drowned thing that looked like me was climbing out through the driver's side window now, its head twisted at the wrong angle, its jaw hung loose. The cracked windows of the Honda shuddered behind me as black water spread across the car deck floor. The three of us hit the top of the stairwell and stumbled onto deck 6. My lungs burned. My boots left wet prints on the clean floor. The purser's area stood 20 feet ahead. A counter ran along the starboard bulkhead beneath a sign that read Alaska Marine Highway System Information. Someone stood behind the counter. He wore a blue Alaska Marine Highway jacket. A badge gleamed on his chest. A cork life belt hung beneath the jacket, the canvas straps gray with age. Drew Sanders. I stopped walking. Aubrey crashed into my shoulder. Her breath came in short gasps. Drew smiled. His teeth were too white. His hair was slicked back hard, parted with a ruler's precision. The jacket fit him wrong. The shoulders were too broad. The sleeves were too long. I looked at the badge. The logo was close. The eagle was there. The Ferry outline was there. But the text beneath it was blurred, like someone had copied it from memory and gotten the spacing wrong. The name tag below the badge said Richardson. Just that. No first name. Present your tickets, Drew said. His voice was smooth, polite, empty. Aubrey's hand tightened on my arm. We're not giving you anything, I said. Drew tilted his head. His pale eyes didn't blink. The MV Columbia has been assigned as the relief vessel for the Princess Sophia, he said. All passengers must confirm their berths before we proceed to Vanderbilt Reef. We're not going to Vanderbilt Reef, I said. This ferry is going to Ketchikan. Drew's smile didn't change. The dead passengers can leave only by replacing themselves with living passengers who accepted comfort, certainty, or rescue from the wrong ship. My stomach dropped. Aubrey made a small sound beside me. Drew leaned forward. His hands rested flat on the counter. Water ran from his cuffs and pooled on the laminate surface. The blankets make a passenger cold enough to be claimed, he said. The keys assign berths. The time answers synchronize you to the sinking. He said it like he was reading a schedule, like he was explaining baggage limits. You've done this before, I said. Every October 24th, Drew said. The relief vessel changes. The passengers change. The manifest must balance. I thought of the laminated sheet beneath my solarium chair. The 9 rules. The warnings. Someone had survived this before. Someone had lived long enough to write it down, to leave it for the next person. The rules weren't folklore. They were instructions. Drew straightened. He extended one hand across the counter. Palm up. Your tickets, he said. Aubrey pulled her boarding pass from her coat pocket. The ink had run across half the paper. Her name was barely visible. Drew's eyes locked onto it. Mrs. Holmes, he said, your berth is ready. He lunged. His hand shot across the counter and clamped around Aubrey's wrist. She screamed. I grabbed her other arm and pulled, but Drew's grip didn't break. Water poured from his sleeve. It ran over Aubrey's hand, over the boarding pass. The ink began to dissolve. Let her go, I shouted. Drew pulled harder. Aubrey's feet slid forward on the wet floor. The exchange is nearly complete, Drew said. The Princess Sophia will accept her in your place. Troy, Aubrey's voice cracked. I yanked with everything I had. Drew leaned farther over the counter. His face was inches from Aubrey's. His breath smelled like salt and rot. Behind us, footsteps pounded on the deck. Diane appeared beside me. Her face was white. Her coat was soaked. She held Dylan's gray wool blanket in both hands. "Rule 7, she said. I didn't understand. Diane turned and ran toward the nearest exterior door. "Diane, no," I shouted. She shoved the door open. Wind roared into the corridor. Rain lashed through the gap. Beyond the doorway, I saw storm black water and a reef breaking white foam under a gray sky. Diane threw the blanket outside. It tumbled through the air and hit the water. Drew shrieked. The sound was inhuman, high and sharp and full of rage. His hand released Aubrey's wrist. He staggered backward into the wall behind the counter. Aubrey fell into me. I caught her and pulled her away from the counter. Diane stood in the open doorway. The wind pulled at her coat. She turned and looked at me. "Tell my daughter I love her," she said. Hands erupted through the doorway, dozens of them. Pale and dripping, fingers like claws. They grabbed Diane's arms, her shoulders, her hair. "Diane," I shouted. I lunged forward. My fingers brushed her coat. The hands yanked her through the door. She didn't scream. She just vanished into the storm. I reached the doorway. The hands were gone. The storm was gone. Beyond the threshold was only the calm, dark water of the inside passage under a pre-dawn sky. The door slammed shut. I stood there. My hand still reached for the handle. My chest heaved. The public address system crackled. A voice I didn't recognize, old and formal, announced, "All passengers of the SS Princess Sophia are accounted for." The speaker went silent. I stared at the door. Seawater ran beneath it and pooled around my boots. The door sealed shut. Water spread beneath it in a thin black line that stopped just short of my boots. I stared at where Diane had been standing 2 seconds ago. My throat closed. I couldn't form her name. Aubrey grabbed my arm. She was shaking so hard I felt it through my jacket. "We need to move," she said. I turned. The corridor behind us looked normal again. Steel walls, fluorescent lights, no wood paneling, no brass signs. The smell of cold seawater was gone, replaced by industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Everett leaned against the wall near the purser's counter. His right hand was wrapped in a towel soaked through with blood. He held it against his chest. His face was gray. "Sunrise," he said. His voice was rough. "We need to be scanned before the light hits." I checked my watch. It was 7:03. Outside the nearest window, the sky was still dark, but a thin line of pale blue had appeared along the horizon. Aubrey pulled her boarding pass from her coat pocket. The Princess Sophia card was gone. She held the Alaska Marine Highway pass in both hands. The ink along the bottom edge was still running, bleeding into the paper like watercolor. Her last name was almost gone. "Everett," I said. He pushed off the wall and stumbled toward the counter. He knocked over a cup of pens. They scattered across the floor. He didn't look at them. He reached beneath the counter with his good hand and pulled out a handheld scanner, the kind they use to check tickets at airports. "Give them to me," he said. I pulled my pass from my pocket and handed it over. He set the scanner on the counter and held my pass under the red light. It beeped once. He dropped my pass and reached for Aubrey's. His hand shook. The scanner slipped. He caught it before it hit the floor, but the movement made him cry out. Fresh blood soaked through the towel. "Let me," I said. "No." He steadied himself against the counter. "Has to be crew." He held Aubrey's pass under the scanner. The red light swept across the blurred ink. The machine beeped twice. Then it beeped a third time. longer, and the screen flashed yellow. "Come on," Everett whispered. The beeping stopped. The screen turned green. He dropped the pass on the counter and looked at the windows. Sunlight hit the glass at 7:04. Real sunlight, not the gray storm light that had pressed against the tarps in the solarium. This was clean and cold and sharp. It poured through the windows and turned the corridor bright. The wooden paneling was gone. The brass sign that had read Canadian Pacific Railway was gone. The water beneath the exterior door was gone. I turned toward the purser's counter and saw that Drew Sanders was gone too. No cork life belt, no dark overcoat, no drowned face. Just Everett, bleeding onto the counter, and Aubrey's boarding pass lying flat under the scanner's green light. I picked up the pass. The ink had stopped running. The first 3 letters of her surname were clear. The last 2 were blurred into a gray smudge, but they hadn't vanished completely. Aubrey took the pass from my hand and stared at it. "Is it over?" she asked. Everett didn't answer right away. He wrapped the towel tighter around his hand and looked down at the floor where the water had been. The tiles were dry. "For now," he said. The ferry's normal sounds returned. The engine hum, the ventilation system, a door opening somewhere below us, footsteps in the corridor, voices. A man laughed. Someone dropped something heavy, and it clanged against metal. Aubrey looked at me. Her eyes were red. She hadn't cried, but she looked like she wanted to. "Diane," she said. I nodded. I couldn't say anything. Everett pushed off the counter and walked toward the windows. He moved slowly, favoring his right side. When he reached the glass, he stopped and looked out at the water. "Crew will ask questions," he said, "when they realize people are missing." "What do we tell them?" I asked. "Nothing." He turned back toward us. "They won't believe you, and if they do, they'll pull the ferry from service. That won't bring anyone back." "Dylan and Diane are gone," Aubrey said. "Someone has to know. They'll be listed as missing passengers," Everett said. "It happens. People go overboard. People leave the ferry at stops and don't come back. The paperwork gets filed. The families get notified. That's all anyone can do." I wanted to argue, but I didn't. He was right. What would I say? That a dead ship tried to take my wife? That an old man in a cork life belt ran a purser's desk that didn't exist? That Diane walked into a storm that wasn't there? They'd think I was in shock, or drunk, or insane. Everett walked past us toward the stairs. He paused at the top step. "Go back to the solarium," he said. "Stay there until we dock. Don't talk to anyone. Don't show anyone that pass." He disappeared down the stairs before I could answer. Aubrey folded her boarding pass and put it back in her pocket. She looked at the windows again. Outside, the inside passage stretched out under the sunrise. Calm water, forested islands, mountains in the distance. It looked normal. It looked like the ferry route we'd boarded in Bellingham. "I don't know where we were," she said quietly, "but we're back now." We walked back to the solarium together. My legs felt weak. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept thinking about Diane standing by the covered windows, whispering that her daughter's voice was calling from outside. I kept thinking about the moment the hands pulled her through the door. The solarium looked the same as when we'd left it. Lounge chairs, backpacks, sleeping bags. A few passengers were awake now, sitting up and stretching. A woman near the window sipped coffee from a thermos. A man scrolled through his phone. No one looked at us. Dylan's duffel bag was still on the floor where he'd left it. Diane's small purse sat on the chair she'd claimed. Both were soaked, not damp. Soaked. Water dripped from the duffel's canvas and pooled on the floor beneath it. Diane's purse was dark with moisture, and when I touched it, salt water ran between my fingers. I looked at Aubrey. She stared at the wet luggage. "They were here," she said. "They were right here with us." I didn't answer. I stood over the soaked bags and held Aubrey's boarding pass in my hand. The last two letters of her surname were blurred into nothing, but the rest of it was still there. She was still here. The ferry reached Ketchikan 9 hours late. I stood on the car deck beside Aubrey, watching crew members unlock the chains that held vehicles in place. The interior lights were bright and ordinary. The smell of diesel and exhaust filled the enclosed space. Everything looked normal except for the fact that we were still alive. Everett had disappeared somewhere above. My hand ached from where I had grabbed the young man's ankle. Aubrey held her boarding pass folded in half so the blurred letters wouldn't show. A uniformed Alaska State Trooper walked down the ramp from the terminal entrance. He was maybe 40, compact build, close-cropped black hair. His boots made sharp sounds on the metal deck. He stopped beside our Honda and looked through the driver's window. Then he turned toward us. "Mr. Holmes? Mrs. Holmes?" I nodded. Aubrey said nothing. "I'm Trooper Tanner Vega. I need both of you to stay beside the vehicle." I looked at Aubrey. She looked at me. We walked over together. Tanner gestured toward the back seat of the Honda. "Crew reported a body inside your car. I'm going to need you to explain how it got there." I leaned forward and looked through the rear window. A man sat upright in the back seat. He wore a dark wool suit that was soaked through. A cork life belt hung across his chest, the canvas straps cutting into the fabric. His skin was gray and bloated. Water pooled on the seat beneath him. A luggage tag was tied to his left wrist with string. I couldn't read the writing from outside, but I knew what it said. Aubrey made a small sound and stepped back. "I don't know who that is," I said. Tanner pulled a flashlight from his belt and shined it through the glass. "Doors are locked. Windows are intact. Vehicle was secured on this deck since Bellingham. So explain how the body got inside." "I can't. Try." I looked at the Honda again. The interior was dry, except for the water directly around the corpse. The windows weren't fogged. There were no cracks in the glass. I had locked the doors myself before we went upstairs. "The car was empty when we parked," I said. "Empty when you parked," Tanner repeated. He wrote something in a small notebook. "And you didn't come back down to the car deck during the crossing?" "We did, once. But the car was locked. We didn't open it." Tanner looked at Aubrey. "Mrs. Holmes?" She nodded without speaking. Everett came down the stairs from deck 5. His right hand was wrapped in gauze that had already soaked through with blood. He walked over slowly, keeping his eyes on the deck. Tanner turned toward him. "You're the steward who called this in?" "Yes, sir." "You saw the body first?" "I did a final walk of the car deck before we docked. Saw it through the window." "And the doors were locked when you found it?" "Yes, sir." Tanner looked back at me. "Mr. Holmes, do you have any explanation for how a body ended up in your locked vehicle?" I wanted to tell him about the rule sheet. I wanted to tell him about Dylan and Diane, and the drowned versions of ourselves pounding on the glass. I wanted to tell him that the corpse in the back seat was wearing a life belt from a ship that sank in 1918. But I knew how it would sound. "No," I said. Tanner closed his notebook. "I'm impounding the vehicle, pending investigation. You'll need to come to the trooper post tomorrow to give statements." "We can't leave without the car," Aubrey said quietly. "You can leave," Tanner said. "You just can't take the car." Everett finally looked up. He stared at me for a second. Then he said, "The body must have been hidden in the vehicle before boarding." Tanner frowned. "Hidden where? There's no trunk space large enough for an adult. And you said the doors were locked." "I don't know, sir. But it couldn't have gotten in during the crossing." "That's what I'm trying to establish." Everett looked down again. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I understood then. He was protecting himself. He was protecting the ferry. If he admitted what had happened, no one would believe him. If he stayed quiet, he kept his job and his sanity and let us carry the weight. I didn't blame him. Tanner gestured toward the ramp. "You're free to go for now. Don't leave Ketchikan until we've finished the investigation." Aubrey picked up her backpack. I picked up mine. We walked past the Honda without looking at it again. Crew members were unloading other vehicles around us. A family with 2 kids rolled past in a minivan, laughing about something. No one else seemed to know what had been found. We walked up the ramp toward the terminal. The air outside was cold and clean. Mountains rose in the distance under gray clouds. The town spread along the waterfront in neat rows of buildings. It looked like a postcard. Aubrey stopped walking. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled something out. A brass key. She held it up by the tag. The metal was tarnished, but dry. The tag was printed with careful handwriting. C19. Below that, a date. November 7th. Our return sailing. "I didn't put this in my pocket," she said. I stared at the key. Neither did I. She turned it over. The back of the tag had more writing. "Passenger transfer confirmed. Berth reserved." Behind us, the MV Columbia sat low in the water, its white hull streaked with rust and salt. The Alaska Marine Highway logo was painted across the side in blue and gold. It looked like any other ferry. It looked like it had always been there. Aubrey stood on the dock holding the key by its tag. The wind pulled at her coat. The ferry loomed behind her. She didn't throw the key away. She put it back in her pocket.